Next, we'll call up Patrick
Your microphone,
Commonware
huh?
to chat on buffered signatures.
Oops, the mic.
Can I just put mic on?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, all good. Cool. We good? Sweet. Today I'm going to talk on reducing block time and resource usage with buffered signatures. So I'm Patrick. I started Commonware about 11 months ago now, so that's flown by for sure. I previously was the head of engineering at Avalanche for the last 3.5 years, and then before that was at Coinbase for 2 years. Commonware, we're building the best stack for verticalized applications in blockchain. So our focus is on how we can basically create a library of awesome open primitives for the best applications to really create differentiated experiences in the space. And so that means building everything from the ground up, like everyone does, I guess, but building it all from the ground up. And so today I'll talk about some of our work on P2P and consensus and how that matters for practical production usage. So to get started, it makes sense to lay the foundation here with what we call Commonware P2P, which is the P2P implementation we've written from scratch. And the rationale for that is best explained by looking at what today's traditional gossip looks like. So here's my crude rendition of Excalidraw of what traditional gossip looks like. And really the history of this, for those that have followed it, is born from this world of like torrenting first, for like everyone P2P. You didn't know who was around and if they were honest or not, and like couldn't trust anybody, and you randomly connected to different peers all the time. It became really useful in Bitcoin with proof of work because you don't know who's going to win, like the mining contest. You kind of have to be loosely connected to everybody because anyone can be a miner at any time. And then this has been adapted, even though proof of stake networks have much more knowledge and much more going on than just a random set of participants. And so we built a P2P stack we call P2P authenticated, which assumes some shared knowledge of participants. And we take some set of identities and match those with actually your network identity. And so we have a custom stream implementation we've written. So there's no like TLS certificate mapping. There's no like other protocols involved. You basically form an encrypted connection with some peer that is identified by some synchronized list, like a consensus participants. And then you can directly connect to everybody. Now, some people say that that's not quite safe because, if I know everyone's identity on the network, I can trivially DOS them if I know their identity. What I would counter to you with is, well, you can do the same thing in traditional gossip. If you just probe the network for a few hours, you can pretty quickly identify which stake participants are where. So why not just assume that? And then if you know everyone's connections, you can actually have really robust firewalls and all sorts of other stuff you can do to make the validators safer than they would otherwise be. So how does this matter for consensus, or like kind of what's going on there? Well, in traditional P2P networks, or like kind of these models most people use, you have like mixes of messages coming from all over the place, so you don't know where things originated from, and they could be manipulated along the path. So let's say that you're in some network and you get some vote from somebody. It may have an invalid signature, and that invalid signature may be because the person who originally emitted it was invalid, or it's because some person along the path manipulated it or forged some message from someone. So the only strategy that really makes any sense is to verify messages immediately, because anything you get, you know nothing about. Now, that's really all you can do. In a P2P authenticated setup, or really any sort of authenticated peer-to-peer mesh, you know that if you get a message from somebody, that it came from them. No matter what they did with it, it came from them. And so if they send you an invalid message, either because it's signed incorrectly or something that's formatted wrong, you know that they alone were responsible. Similarly, because it's authenticated, you don't actually have to put signatures on every message that comes in, because again, you know it's from them. You've already authenticated a connection via some cryptographically secure handshake. So what can you do with this? Well, in consensus, you have this problem where you have some consensus thing that's listening to messages of like voting and views, and you're verifying every signature that comes in. And then once you have a quorum of signatures, you like either notarize or finalize or whatever word you want to use, commit, pre-commit, lock. And what we instead do now is what we call signature buffering, which is instead keep all the incoming messages for a particular round of consensus and store them, not actually verify them at all until we actually have a quorum where we would normally do something. And because we use threshold signatures in consensus, these are actually just partial signatures of identities evaluated at some point on a polynomial, which just look like BLS keys. So we actually just do a batch multi-signature verification. And once we have enough that it would actually matter. So in the best case, right, that's just 1 or 2 pairings, super fast, super efficient. What can happen though, obviously, is, well, there can be an incorrect one. So you may need to do some bisection to figure out what signature that's provided is wrong. Now you would say, well, if every view has this, like this is going to be way less efficient, maybe even 2 times worse than just verifying every signature to begin with. And that's where P2P authenticated comes in, because we can actually block malicious peers in the swarm as soon as we detect an invalid signature. And now if you imagine you have 1,000 participants and you block someone as soon as something's invalid, and let's say like an epoch is like 2 to 3 weeks, I mean, you may have like 0.00001% of views actually have any bisection going on at most. So almost always you're just in an extremely efficient kind of equilibrium. So is this just an idea where it's at? So we implemented it and it's live. You can check out our demo of this. It's called Alto. It's all open, MIT Apache 2. And basically we took the block time in our consensus demo on like a uniform distribution of 50 validators from about 255 millisecond block time to 200 millisecond block time, and then finality down, also 20%. And most importantly, the CPU usage dropped 65% because we're just verifying many, many less signatures. And why did the block time and finality go down? Well, like you verify signatures in order, and that takes time. And so if it's a BLS signature, it can take half a millisecond or a millisecond. Either you got to put more cores or just do it serially. And so if you just don't do that, yeah, it ends up getting way faster and use less CPU. So best of both worlds. So yeah, we use this. This is just an example of like one of the tricks and different things you can get when you start to verticalize deeper into the stack. And so yeah, we implemented that. It's all available now. And then wanted to use the last few minutes here before questions to talk about a few other things we've been working on the last few months. The first we released earlier this week. It's called Minimit, which is a Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus, safe up to 20% Byzantine adversary. And what it does differently is it's a 2-phase consensus that has really, really fast blocks. So instead of focusing on a fast path with a slow path fallback for crash faults, instead we focus just on basically 20% adversary and use the quorum intersection properties that you would get from that to instead have faster blocks. And so if you like simplex, we think you'll love Minimit if you're okay with that setting for a Byzantine tolerance. So we released that. You can check that out on our blog. And then I wanted to bring this one up just because we have Florian here, because Autobahn is awesome. We think it's also very cool. So we've actually implemented an open spec of Autobahn we call ordered broadcast, which does that pre-consensus component, and have worked on integrating actually like a production instantiation of it, which we call sequencer-driven DSMR, where basically the network resells capacity to the sequencers or the participants in Autobahn that actually sequence stuff. And the trick here is we solve a lot of the fee collection problem that is left as an open question in Autobahn around how to actually make sure that users don't fill blocks and chunks with useless stuff that they've sent to like 5 people. And so this is a scheme we think is really exciting for doing that. So if you're interested in that, we also have a protocol called ordered broadcast that implements some of this with threshold signatures. And then a few weeks ago, I presented this at the Solana conference. So there's a longer form video of me talking about it there. So yeah, today we have 25 or so primitives for doing all sorts of different parts of the stack. and have a few partners that we're working with. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions? Yeah.
So if like each validator has the validator list all the time, do we need to have P2P to actually achieve like blocking malicious signatures? Because I feel like if you know the validator set ahead of time, right, you can already like know that let's say D mess with e-signature, so you wouldn't necessarily need to have P2P. I feel like.
Can you say one more time? Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well.
Yeah. So if like let's say you have the validator set already, right? And
Yep.
you already know the public keys of each validator.
Yep.
Would you necessarily need to do P2P to actually be able to block? Let's say if D forwards you an invalid message from E, right? You can already know that even in a non-P2P setting, you already know that D is acting maliciously.
Yeah, so the problem, this is a great point that I forgot to clarify. The problem in traditional is so like if they're sending you anything invalid, you know that D is probably someone you shouldn't be connected to. However, though, because the peer identity has nothing to do with the consensus identity, it would be trivial for me to then just spin up 5,000 Ds and just keep swarming you with junk. Very good question. I wrote that in my notes and forgot to say it, so thank you. Yeah, great listener. Thanks. Cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So have you heard of like zero split attack or consensus attack for BLS aggregation? So I can.
I don't know that specific attack. Maybe you can explain it.
Yeah. So I mean, the idea is simple. So I mean, just think of those signatures that you're actually.
Yep.
This is the slide. So think of those signatures that you're aggregating as some integers. So imagine, and the aggregation is just sum all of them together and add all of them together. So instead of sending, let's say my signature is 5 and your signature is 10, instead of sending 15, instead of sending 5 and 10, I can send 8, you can send 7, which are two wrong signatures, but at the end, that would add to the same number. So it's called consensus attack. And zero split attack is something that I assume that everyone announced their public key.
Correct.
At the beginning.
Yeah, they've already. There's no rogue key
so
attack.
they can just announce their public keys such that those two public keys add to 0, and that means that without even signing anything, they can just everyone can include them in their like list. So they can reach to 12 plus 1.
Yeah.
So it depends on kind of probably for hot stuff consensus, these are not serious attacks.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know, like maybe if we have two different leaders and having some wrong signatures, that could be problematic. So.
Yeah, so there's two things going on here that are good to touch on here. The one is actually, I'm going to take them in the opposite order just because we talked about the one recently. So the public key announcement one. Because this is actually over partial signatures, their public keys are actually evaluations of like a group polynomial for a threshold signature scheme. So they don't even have the opportunity to specify a public key. The public key is derived from the group polynomial from the reshare or DKG. In the case that they would, like a multi-signature attack, you have to make sure obviously that they have a signature that you can verify against that public key to show that they actually have possession of that key. You could obviously just grind forever and eventually try and find some inverse that causes the, at least on the public key side, like those added public keys to kind of disappear. I mean, I think on that side, you end up just having to assume that they can't also do the same thing on the signature side. And the trick there is that anytime you do a verification for people that are concerned about this attack, you obviously add a little randomness into the actual verification process. I don't think we add randomness into verification currently, but I know Blast, which is what we use and for some of this and many people use, does offer the option to add randomness strategically to try and defend against someone trying to do this attack because it'll just still fail if the randomness is from a secure source. Yeah. Both are very practical considerations, I guess. Unclear on the probability of success on that attack, but I know it's something that people smarter than me have also thought about. Yeah. So our approach with BLS is like, what parameters and like things does Ethereum care about for a lot of their multi-signature stuff? And if they're pretty happy with a certain configuration, we like to treat that as a pretty significant burden of doubt before we diverge too much. Not to say that you shouldn't, but you should be very confident in why you're diverging if they think that that's probably okay. So, but yeah, it's a good question. Do you guys use BLS stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
So my understanding of the trade-off between like processing versus having PDP is generally not just like the balance, like the discovery of it, but also like the fact that in PDP you have to maintain like end connections in real time. Are you guys like assuming some cap to the number of nodes in this case? Or, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is a common misconception in some of like the P2P constructions that like, oh, your node can't hold that many connections. So at Avalanche, we supported about 1,800 simultaneous TCP connections on a live permissionless, proof of stake network with no problem whatsoever. So I think people think it's like, oh, you shouldn't have more than 100 connections or like 1,000 connections open. Like you can go far above it.
I think 2K is reasonable, but what about like a size like let's say Ethereum like network size?
So we think 10,000 is reasonable, and beyond that, it probably is not going to work.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I think past that, you're going to want to have like probably more like UDP heavy constructions, and then authentication becomes a very different thing and how you think about it. And this actually blends well into probably Babak's talk about some of the stuff they do with UDP to avoid TCP connections. Yeah, I mean, there's this funny quote I heard. I think it was Anatoly actually. Is like, if you I pray that my competitors optimize for like infinite throughput or infinite capacity or infinite participation, and our goal is like to support at very low latency like 2,000 or so validators, and we feel like this is a good construction for that. Anything beyond that would be outside of our recommended usage, and it might work, but it's not something we're going to focus on testing on in the short term. Yeah, but yeah. Sure.
Sorry, could you just explain, do you mind explaining one more time how the CPU compute is like extremely lowered?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I mean, this is just the multi-signature trick or like batch verification trick that some curves offer. So like ED also offers it, so you could use it for that too. So normally if you're verifying, every message that comes in, you have like a single signature verification for each message. Because again, you don't know who it came from, so before you should do anything with it, you should probably check that it's valid. That takes basically verifying one signature in BLS in particular is much, much more expensive than verifying a batch at once. And so the savings in compute is 95% attributed to BLS batch or like multi-signature verification. So that's almost exclusively where the savings comes from. So finding a way to safely use multi-signature verification in consensus is not something we've seen. Yeah.
And so are you batching it when you're buffering all those signatures?
Yeah, so basically the very specific flow here is we'll get a bunch of messages in, and imagine like we know all the validators that are going to be active in that view. So we just, let's say, allocate an array of like their order. So like you have 1,000 validators, so let's say it's a 1,000 thing, and you store in it, basically as messages come in, like put them in that slot. And then as soon as you detect that there are 2f+1 there, which is in the case of the consensus we're using in Alto, like what you would need as a quorum, you then say, oh, time to try verifying. You take all those messages and then construct a multi-signature verification and then just try to verify. And the problem then is like, well, it could fail. And so then in that case, you just start to slice and bisect until you find the ones that are wrong. And the trick and why the P2P matters so much is when you identify someone that's wrong, you need to make sure that you're never doing their work again. Otherwise, you can get DOSed, and then this is just way worse. And so that's where the ability to persistently block an identity is critically important for safety and like liveness.
But what if the identity was manipulated in between like transacting? Meaning like it's not their original, like the message was the original sender is not the actual like malicious attacker.
So the key with the authenticated P2P is that's not possible. Yeah. So you in at least the way we use authenticated P2P, you never ferry messages for someone else. Yeah. If you did, then it would be broken again probably. So yeah. Point being, pretty much that like there's a lot of tuning still I think to do around the P2P side that can have massive implications for the layers above. Yeah.
Is that bisecting step the only trade-off?
Well, I mean, if you're assuming you're okay with the authenticated, which is some would say a trade-off, then yeah, that's the other trade-off. is that you want to have epochs or like participation consistency long enough where you're okay amortizing potentially like basically many holes or like many times where you might have to do the bisection. So like if you did it 1,000 times, but your epochs are only 1,000 views, like that may not be great. But if it is many more views, which is almost always the case, then it's not too bad of a trade-off. Yeah. But you could have like a view, for example, that is looks slow because it has a bunch of invalid signatures. And so you end up having to try and verify or do the bisection, which is a lot slower, obviously, than all the views that didn't have invalid signatures. So it can cause, in some of those views, more variance, but we think that the savings in compute is more than worth that trade-off. Yeah.
I think the block time reduction, that is the case. There is no invalid signature.
Yeah, so this is averaged over a bunch of time. And if we, I think, added some Byzantine participants, like we would expect maybe more sporadic. So it's not like it goes from like 0 to like 10 minutes or something like that.
Do you
Like,
have any observation when there is invalid?
yeah, so we actually maintain a benchmark site. So if you go to commonware.xyz/benchmarks, we actually benchmark the bisection on a bunch of different configurations to see how slow it could be. So you can factor that in if you want to do something like this. We haven't made it parallel yet, but if you basically made it parallel, you could just use more cores to solve that problem. We've been trying to minimize resource usage, so consensus just runs on like 1 core, I guess, but you could use it to try and catch up in that bad case. Yeah. So, cool. All right, thank you for the questions. Yeah.